It was supposed to be a quiet evening by the lake. The sun dipped low, painting the water in gold and crimson. The kind of view that made me grateful for every sacrifice I'd made to build this life. This wasn't just any like it was mine. It's my ranch, my land, my sanctuary. After weeks of stress, I had finally set up a simple campfire, pitched a tent, and sat down to breathe in peace. But peace doesn't last long when an HOA thinks they own the world. I heard the crunch of gravel before I saw them two SUVs creeping down the dirt road like they were about to raid enemy territory. Doors slammed, and out came the self-appointed rulers of the neighborhood. At the front, the so-called president of the HOA, Linda, woman who carried herself like she had been crowned queen of every blade of grass in the county. Her voice cut across the water before she even reached me. "You can't camp here. This is HOA property." I stayed seated, calm, watching the fire crackle. "Actually, Linda," I said slowly, "this is my ranch." "And that lake you're pointing at? It's been in my family for 3 generations. That should have been enough. Normal person would have walked away, maybe apologized, but not Linda. Her face turned red and she pulled out her phone. "We'll see about that. I'm calling the cops." The others behind her nodded like obedient soldiers, whispering about how rules are rules and how I was setting a bad example. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, simply leaned back, staring at the sky, wondering how long it would take for them to realize the truth, that the land they thought they controlled had never belonged to them at all. Minutes later, flashing lights broke the darkness. The sound of sirens echoed across the ranch as a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up. The HOA members stood tall, smirking, as if they'd finally won some invisible battle. The officer stepped out, his boots crunching against the dirt, his flashlight sweeping across the lake before landing on me. "Evening, sir. These folks here say you're trespassing." I chuckled, not out of disrespect, but because of the sheer absurdity. Trespassing on my own land? The officer frowned, glancing between me and the HOA crowd. Linda stepped forward with her binder, the infamous HOA binder, stuffed with papers and highlighted sections. She waved it like it was a holy scripture. "See, the rules state no overnight camping by the water. It lowers property values." The officer took the binder, flipping through it, his face unreadable. For a moment, Linda smirked at me, confident she had the law on her side. But then, something shifted. The officer closed the binder, handed it back, and asked one simple question that sent a chill through every HOA member standing there. "Ma'am, do you realize this ranch isn't under your HOA jurisdiction?" Silence. Linda blinked, caught off guard.
What do you mean? This lake is part of the community boundary?
The officer shook his head. "Not according to county records. This land has never been HOA property." Which means... He turned toward me, his expression softening. "Sir, you're well within your rights to camp here." I nodded, trying not to smile. "Told you." But the real twist hadn't even hit them yet. 'Cause what none of them knew what was about to unravel everything they believed they controlled. Is that not only was this land not theirs, but the HOA had been trespassing across it for years. The trails they patrolled, the signs they posted, even the picnic tables they claimed as community property, all of it sat squarely on my deeded land. As the officer delivered his verdict, the smug expressions drained from their faces. Linda's mouth opened, then closed again, like she couldn't find the words. The other HOA members shifted uncomfortably, suddenly less sure of the ground they stood on. That was when I realized this was bigger than one argument. This wasn't just about a tent or a campfire. This was about exposing a truth they had buried under arrogance and paperwork. A truth that would shake the very foundation of their so-called authority. I looked at Linda, my voice calm but steady. "You've been trespassing on my ranch for years. Tonight, you've just called the cops to prove it." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Is that true?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a copy of my property deed. I handed it to him. He studied it under his flashlight, then whistled softly. "Well, I'll be damned." Linda took a step back, clutching her binder like it could protect her from the truth. Her little empire was crumbling, and she knew it. The night air grew heavier, the fire crackling louder in the silence. What started as an evening of peace had turned into something else, entirely an awakening. And it was only the beginning. The sheriff stood there for a long moment, holding my deed in his hand, scanning it again and again. His flashlight beam trembled slightly, as if even he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up, his eyes locking on mine with a respect that hadn't been there before. "Sir," he said, "this document's as clear as day. You own this ranch. You own that lake. You own the paths these folks have been using. It's right here in black and white." I nodded slowly. I've been patient. I let them use the land for years, thinking maybe it would bring some good kids fishing, families having picnics. But patience runs thin when people start telling me I can't enjoy my own property. Linda's face turned scarlet. She sputtered, her voice shrill. "That can't be right. We've always controlled this lake. It's in the HOA records." The sheriff tilted his head, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Ma'am, with all due respect, HOA records don't trump county land deeds. You've been operating under the wrong assumption. From where I'm standing, you and your board may have been trespassing this entire time." The murmur started then. The other HOA members glanced at each other nervously, their once smug confidence unraveling. One of them, a tall man with glasses, stepped forward cautiously. "Linda, what if he's right? What if this land really doesn't belong to us?" Linda whipped around on him like a predator cornered. "Don't you dare side with him. We're the HOA. We make the rules." But her voice cracked on that last word. It's the kind of crack that told me she didn't believe her own story anymore. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Here's what's going to happen. Nobody's getting arrested tonight, except maybe for filing false complaints if this nonsense keeps up. And if this gentleman here wants to press trespassing charges against your HOA, he has every right to." I leaned forward, letting the firelight cast shadows across my face. "I'm not here for revenge, but I am here for truth. And the truth is, you've been intimidating families with fines and threats on land that isn't even yours. That ends tonight." For the first time, Linda stepped back. Her iron grip on that binder loosened. She looked smaller, almost fragile, but the fire in her eyes was still there. "You think you can just embarrass us? You think this will stop the HOA? We'll fight this in court. And court is where we'll go," I replied. "When the judge sees the deed, when they see how you've abused your so-called authority, it won't be me answering questions. It'll be you." The sheriff gave a low whistle. "He's right, ma'am. You may want to think real hard before dragging this out. Could be a lot of liability for your board if you've been enforcing rules on property you Dante actually own." The silence that followed was deafening. The other HOA members, the ones who had followed Linda for years, slowly drifted back. They wouldn't meet her eyes. As one by one, they turned their backs, muttering excuses, retreating to their cars. The glow of headlights flickered as engines roared to life. Soon, it was just Linda, clutching her binder, her hands trembling. The sheriff handed me back my deed with a nod, then turned to her. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This man is within his rights. And if you don't want tonight to get worse for you, I suggest you walk away." Linda glared at me one last time, her eyes filled with rage and humiliation. Then, without a word, she spun on her heel and stormed off into the dark, her shoes crunching against the dirt. The sheriff lingered for a moment, his voice softer now. "You know, most folks don't stand up to them. They think the HOA is untouchable. I'm glad you did." I gave a small nod. Sometimes the only way to remind people where the lines are is to show them who drew them in the first place. As his cruiser pulled away, the red and blue lights fading into the night, I stared at the lake, shimmering under the moonlight. This battle wasn't over, not yet. Linda was too proud, too consumed by control to let it end here. And I knew deep down, the next move she made would be far more dangerous. The days after that confrontation were quiet to quiet. Should have felt relieved, camping by my own lake without interruption. But instead, there was a tension in the air, like a storm waiting just beyond the horizon. My wife Claire noticed it too. "You think she's really done?" she asked one evening as we sat on the porch. The cicadas hummed in the background, the smell of fresh hay drifting from the barn. I shook my head. Not a chance. Linda doesn't know how to quit. She'll come back harder. The question is how. And sure enough, the answer came 2 days later. I was driving back from town when I spotted the signs. Bright, freshly hammered into the ground HOA property, no trespassing. They weren't just near the lake. They were along the trails, at the entrance to my driveway, even at the edge of my hayfield. It was like the HOA had declared war, planting flags on every inch of land they could touch. When I pulled up, Linda was there with 2 board members, clipboard in hand, smug as ever. "You can't just erase years of community use with a piece of paper," she spat. "This land has been part of the HOA for as long as anyone remembers." I laughed bitterly. "Memories don't override deeds, Linda. You're trespassing again," she smirked, pulling out her phone. "Then sue us. Let's see how far your patience goes when lawyers get involved." And that was when I saw her angle. She wasn't trying to win legally. She was trying to bleed me dry with endless battles, fines, and harassment until I gave up. It was intimidation, pure and simple. That night, I pored over the deed again, tracing every boundary line, every surveyed inch of property. Claire sat beside me, her hand resting on my shoulder. "You could take this to court now. End it." I shook my head. "Not yet. If I drag this to court, she'll play the victim. She'll twist it into me being some greedy landowner, crushing the community. No, I need proof she's crossed the line so badly that no judge can ignore it." The proof came sooner than I expected. One Saturday morning, I heard voices by the lake. When I walked down, I froze in disbelief. The HOA had set up picnic tables, grills, even a rental sign. They were advertising my lake as if it were their private park, charging residence fees to reserve areas that belonged to me. Claire gasped beside me. "They're making money off your land." I snapped a picture, then another, documenting everything: the tables, the signs, the clipboard where Linda's cronies were taking payments. My blood boiled, but I didn't storm in. Not yet. Instead, I called the sheriff. When he arrived, Linda's smugness melted instantly. She rushed forward, binder in hand. "Officer, he's harassing us again." But the sheriff raised his hand. "Enough. I've seen the deed. And now I see what you're doing. You're collecting money on property that doesn't belong to you. That's fraud, ma'am. Trespassing." Combined, Linda paled, her voice stammering. "No, this is HOA land." The sheriff cut her off sharply. "No, it's not. And if you don't remove these tables and signs today, I'll have no choice but to file charges." The other board members went silent. You could see it in their eyes. They were done following her. One man dropped his clipboard, muttering, "I'm not getting arrested for this." But Linda wasn't ready to surrender. She stepped toward me, her voice low and venomous. "You think this is over? I'll bury you in paperwork. You'll regret ever standing against me." I met her glare with calm resolve. "You can't bury the truth, Linda. And the more you fight, the deeper the hole you're digging for yourself." The sheriff leaned closer to her. "Ma'am, one more stunt like this and I'll haul you in myself. Do you understand?" For the first time, Linda didn't answer. She just stared at me with eyes full of hatred, then turned sharply on her heel. But as she stormed away, I knew this wasn't her last move. She was humiliated, cornered, and desperate people don't play fair. As the sun set over the lake, Claire slipped her hand into mine. "What if she really does take us to court?" I looked out over the water, its surface rippling with fading light. "Then we'll fight. Not just for us, for everyone she's bullied with her fake rules. It's not just about land anymore. It's about freedom." And deep down, I knew the real battle was only beginning. The week after, the sheriff forced Linda to take down her signs. The neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Some folks were relieved, finally realizing the HOA had overstepped. Others were nervous, wondering what Linda might do next. Me, I wasn't nervous. I was prepared, because if Linda had taught me anything, it was that people like her don't back down. They double down. And I was right. On a Tuesday morning, a thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, stamped across the front. Certified legal notice. My stomach tightened as I tore it open. Inside was a formal lawsuit filed by the HOA against me. Their claim? That my ranch, my lake, my trails were easements that belonged to the community. They were demanding access, control, and even damages for me restricting their use. Claire read over my shoulder, her face pale. "She's suing us?" I nodded slowly, anger simmering beneath my calm. "Not just suing. She's trying to rewrite history." For a moment, the weight of it pressed down on me. Lawsuits weren't cheap. They drained you not just your wallet, but your energy, your spirit. That was Linda's strategy. Break me with endless paperwork. But what she didn't realize was that I'd been ready for this. I had proof. I had history. And more importantly, I had the truth. I called my attorney, a sharp man named Grant, who had handled land disputes for decades. Not when I explained the situation. He actually laughed. I've seen some HOA overreach before, but this is outrageous. Don't worry, we'll handle it. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. Those weeks felt endless. HOA members whispered whenever I drove past. Some avoided me entirely, too scared to choose a side. Others quietly offered their support, slipping me notes or stopping by to say, "We're rooting for you." The night before the trial, Claire sat with me on the porch, her hand resting on mine. "Whatever happens, remember you're not just fighting for us. You're fighting for everyone." She's intimidated. I nodded, staring at the moonlit lake. "Then I'll make sure this fight counts." The courtroom was packed the next morning. Neighbors filled the benches, curious and nervous. At the front sat Linda, flanked by 2 attorneys in sharp suits. She wore a smug smile, binder clutched like a shield. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. This was it. Linda's lawyer went first, speaking with polished arrogance. "Your Honor, the HOA has maintained and managed this lake and surrounding areas for years. By precedent of community use, these areas fall under HOA authority. The defendant has disrupted this long-standing order." The judge nodded thoughtfully, scribbling notes. Then it was Grant's turn. He stood calmly, his voice steady. "Your Honor, precedent doesn't trump property law. This is not community land. This is private land deeded and surveyed for over a century. The HOA not only trespassed but attempted to profit from it without a single legal right." He handed over copies of the deed, maps, and photographs I had taken of the picnic rentals. The judge's eyebrows rose as he examined them. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. But then came the twist I hadn't expected. Linda stood up, binder in hand, and shouted, "That deed is wrong. The county records are outdated. This lake has always belonged to the HOA. The judge slammed his gavel. "Sit down, ma'am. You'll have your turn." But Linda wasn't finished. She stormed to the front, slapping her binder on the table. "Look, we have rules. We have documents. This community relies on us to enforce order." The judge opened the binder, flipping through the pages. His expression hardened. "These are HOA bylaws. They apply only to properties within the HOA boundary. And according to this deed," he held up my document, "this ranch has never been included." The room erupted. Neighbors gasped. Some even laughed. Linda's face turned ghostly pale. The judge leaned forward. "Ma'am, if you continue to enforce HOA authority on property you don't own, not only will your claims be dismissed, but you may be held personally liable for damages." Linda staggered back, as if the words had physically struck her. For the first time, she had no comeback. The judge turned to me. "Sir, you have the right to full and unrestricted use of your property. If you wish, you may file counterclaims against the HOA for trespassing and fraud." I nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor, for now. I just want my land respected. But I won't hesitate to protect it again if I have to." The gavel struck. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted in murmurs again, but this time they weren't whispers of fear. They were sighs of relief, smiles breaking across faces that had been tense for years. Claire squeezed my hand, her eyes glistening. "It's over," she whispered. But deep down, I knew it wasn't truly over, because Linda didn't lose gracefully. As much as the courtroom had silenced her, I could still see the fire burning in her eyes. The battle was won. But the war for peace in our community, that was still to come. When we walked out of the courthouse that day, the sun felt different, brighter, warmer, like the world itself was telling us we had finally done the right thing. Neighbors gathered around, shaking my hand, patting me on the back, whispering things they hadn't dared to say before. "Thank you for standing up to her. You don't know how much this means to all of us. We've been scared for years. Maybe now, things will change." Claire smiled at them, her voice breaking with emotion. "We weren't fighting just for us. We were fighting for every one of you." But I noticed something else too. In the corner of the courthouse steps, Linda stood alone. No attorneys by her side. No allies. No binder to cling to. Her face was tight with rage, but her eyes looked empty. For just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost life settled back into its rhythm after that. But the effects of the battle ran deep. For the first time in years, I sat by my lake without fear of a knock at the door or a letter stuffed with threats. The ranch felt like mine again, not just by law, but in spirit. Neighbors started coming around more, too. Families brought their kids to visit, some bringing pies or casseroles as a thank you. One older couple even admitted, "We always thought the HOA had the right. We didn't know they were trespassing. We're so sorry for not speaking up sooner." I just smiled. What matters is that now you know. And you're free too. For a while, things were quiet, peaceful, but if I'd learned anything, it was that people like Linda never go quietly. One evening, I was closing up the barn when Claire rushed out, waving her phone. "You need to see this." She pulled up a video, shaky and grainy, clearly filmed by a neighbor. Linda stood in the middle of the HOA meeting hall, her voice echoing with venom. "He humiliated us in court. He stole from this community. We cannot let him win," she screamed, pounding her fists on the table. "If the system won't protect us, then we'll take matters into our own hands." Gasps filled the room. A few people nodded nervously, but most looked horrified. The video ended there. Claire's eyes widened. "She's not done," I sighed, rubbing my temples. "No, but maybe it's time she finally faces the consequences." The next morning, I made a call to Sheriff Daniels. He met me at the ranch an hour later. The video pulled up on his tablet. He shook his head slowly. "I was hoping she'd learned her lesson. What happens now?" I asked. The sheriff looked me in the eye. "Citing people to harass you. That's crossing into criminal territory. She's not just an overzealous HOA president anymore. She's a liability." Within a week, Linda was removed from her position as HOA president. She wasn't arrested, though the sheriff warned her any more stunts would put her in jail. The HOA board voted unanimously to rewrite their bylaws, stripping her of any influence. For the first time in decades, she had no power. The neighborhood felt lighter. At the next community barbecue, laughter echoed across the fields, and for once, nobody looked over their shoulder. I stood by the lake with Claire, watching kids skip stones across the water. She leaned against me and whispered, "You did it. You really did it." I shook my head, smiling softly. "No, we all did." By standing up to her together, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky with orange and gold, I realized something. The battle had started with a simple night of camping, but it had ended with something far bigger. It had ended with freedom. Not just for me, but for an entire community that had lived too long in fear of one woman's control. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that silence only feeds bullies. The moment you speak, the moment you stand, everything changes. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt cornered, intimidated, or trapped by someone who thinks they hold all the power, remember this story. Remember that the law is stronger than fear, and truth is stronger than lies. And most importantly, remember, your voice matters. Because sometimes, all it takes to reclaim your freedom is to stand. So don't stay silent. Share this story. Let others know they're not alone. And if you're ready to hear more stories of justice, resilience, and people standing up for what's right, make sure to subscribe because there are plenty more to come.